This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, welcome to a new edition of Behind the Headlines. I'm Maura Donley, an associate of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. And I'm joined today with my co-host, Jere Strittmatter. Thank you for being with us today. Jere is also an associate with the center. Charlie, as you know, is our usual host, and he is on assignment. So I'm very fortunate to have you with us today.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we have a great first guest here today. We have Mr. Bob Latham from the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors.
Maura, Jere, good to be with you, as always.
Always good. I don't know whether you've been doing a little bit of a dance lately because of the infrastructure bill, but it's got to be good news for your members and for your organization. So tell us a little bit about how it's going to impact Pennsylvania.
Sure. Let me temper some of the expectations. You know, in the media coverage of the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act, as it was known in Washington. Of course, a major increase in funding for not only transportation infrastructure, but other types of infrastructure, although we're focusing here mostly on roads and bridges and a little bit on public transit. So what happened? Essentially, a 20% or 30% boost in funding for Pennsylvania's roads and bridges over a 5-year period. That's very good news. The point, though, is that this is not a panacea. It doesn't solve all the problems. It is good news. It will allow us to do a lot of improvements on roads and bridges throughout the Commonwealth, but there's still going to be more to be done. And let me just kind of sort of put this into perspective. Pennsylvania normally contracts out about it had been about $2.5 billion a year, and this was a result of the legislature and Governor Corbett's transportation funding bill. That number has dropped down to about $2 billion over the last couple of years on the average. This infrastructure bill from Washington will allow us to move that program, that value of construction projects, back up to that 2.5 level. So it really just gets us back to where we needed to be. Again, a 20% increase over the last couple of years, sort of back to where we need to be. We really need to move that needle more to the $3.0 billion and rising. And again, this is a value of construction contracts, not to confuse people with budgetary numbers and that sort of thing, which is what was reported. So again, pretty happy with the result here. A little bit more to be done in that respect.
I know it's going to be good for all the viewers too, for the fact, because this is the safety is what we always talk about and what's needed, because that's where the project dollars usually go, and so that's a big improvement too, like with the bridges that we were working on over the many years, but now this will be an added boost too, correct?
Yeah, that's a good point. So we have about 15% of our bridges in Pennsylvania are bad, which puts us, kind of in the high category for states. A recent study by the Reason Foundation found us in the mid-40s, as far as number of bad bridges, but that's really kind of come down. We've fixed a lot of bridges using the money from Act 89, as we call it, the state transportation funding bill. We had 6,000 bad bridges in 2013. We have 3,000 today. That's a lot. Yeah. When we have 25,000 on the system, it makes us one of the largest systems in the country. So that's good news. We cut it in half, but you still have that many more that need to be worked on. And again, not to indicate that that these things are going to fall down or anything. They just need work, and everybody kind of recognizes that. But this additional monies will allow us to do that, because there is, in addition to what we call core highway funding in this package, there is actually a special bridge category, which Pennsylvania did better in than some other states because of our needs. So we'll be able to get at that. You're right. And that and some lane winding, intersection improvements, also work on rural roads, safety appurtenances, guide rail, things like that, shoulder widening, all those types of things add up to safer roads and safer travel for motorists in Pennsylvania.
So if I recall correctly, it was around this time last year when there was a lot of angst around funding funding construction projects on our roads. So it's going to be a much better Christmas holiday season for the construction industry.
Well, the outlook is good.
Yeah.
You know, I wouldn't say the future's so bright we got to wear shades, but we're in good shape. We're much better than we were a year ago. You're right. I mean, it almost seems like it didn't happen. A year ago, the Wolf administration announced that they had run out of money and there would be no more projects for the rest of the future without a bond issuance. And the state treasurer came to the rescue. We kind of salvaged the program. But that's what I'm talking about. This huge dip as a result of that. There was a drop in revenue as a result, you know, from the shutdown of COVID in 2020. That's rebounded back. We're, you know, our analysis of revenue estimates are that we're on a good trend line with transportation revenues. That's gas tax, fuel taxes, diesel taxes, registration fees, and that sort of thing. So, you know, we're back to steady, but this will help us increase our ability on highway funding.
And thanks to you and your members for being so proactive over the many years, so that transportation has been sort of taken off to the side and say, well, we're going to have the experts here, rather than people who get elected and come in and all of a sudden become transportation experts, like at the federal level, that don't know what they're doing. We're very blessed that your organization, you know, has these roads. I was driving on 283 today, and you know, that's been many years since that was, you know, taken care of. It was a big safety issue many years ago, but thanks to the highway builders, they fixed it. It works well, and so I just want to, you know, commend you, you know, for doing that. But one big thing is still the state police dollars are being drained away from what needs to be done, and the same thing with the turnpike, with mass transit. Now, are we going to be able to, with the dollars that came in before and that got put away for a rainy day, are we going to be able to really have a robust construction in the spring, because we're going to get those state police dollars back?
Let me circle back to the federal bill for a minute, Jerry. I think we do need to recognize the bipartisan nature of this package. There were some 19 Republican senators that voted for it. Not so bipartisan in the House, but we want to recognize Representative Brian Fitzpatrick from Bucks County, who was a Republican who voted for it, and of course all of our other House members on the Democrat side that stepped up for this bill, because this is going to be very, very important for infrastructure in a lot of areas. Now let me just mention one thing, and that is federal dollars come to the state as a 80-20 match. So the state has to put up 20% in order to match the federal dollars. And right now, we're in pretty good shape in that situation. But in maybe 2023, 2024, as these federal dollars start to increase, and if our revenues continue to be somewhat flat, we could be getting up against it, if you will, in our ability
especially electric cars and whoever not paying their fair share.
Right. So especially with that and fuel efficiency and that sort of thing. So we could be up against it, which gets back to your point. Okay, so where do we come up with the matching funds? Well, we have $670 million that motorists are paying right now. Commercial drivers, passenger drivers, people that are paying into the system, trucking companies, you and I, through gas taxes, registration fees that are going into the motor license fund that's going right back out to the general fund to pay for the state police. So looking at a way to make sure that we have good funding for the state police with other sources would certainly free up that money, and then all of a sudden you don't have a problem with matching funds. So that's something that definitely the General Assembly and the administration needs to look at very soon.
Do you foresee a day when they actually stop doing this? I mean, because it seems like we've been talking about this for quite a while.
Well, I don't know. We've been talking about the federal bill for 20-some years, so I figured if I lived long enough, maybe we'd see it. So maybe it's the same thing with the state police. But Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think we're looking at we're going to have to look at a general overhaul of our tax structure, and that's definitely going to be a part of it. Jerry mentioned the turnpike and the bonding system that's going in to pay for mass transit. That hits a deadline July 1 of 2022. So that's a situation that's going to have to be dealt with. So maybe, as in concert with one another, it can happen as well.
So in addition to the funding issues, which you were in the thick of, what other issues is APC working on?
Well, we are caught up, just like every other industry, particularly on the construction side, with the supply chain and material cost issues. And so, we're dealing with those right now. And one of the things we're working with our owner agencies, which are primarily PennDOT and the Turnpike Commission, are how can we manage our projects, how can we manage the time and project time to work around some of these situations. And the contractors take the risk. We understand that, so we're not asking the department to take the risk. But what we're looking at is maybe schedule changes as new projects come out, and that's why we're probably going to see a little bit slower rollout of this construction program rather than hitting the gas right away, so that we can make sure that we're managing those projects and having materials get ordered. You need sign poles, guide rail, additives to concrete and asphalt, and these sorts of things that are in short supply, or maybe something that you could order 3 months is now like 9 months or a year, so you've got to schedule the project around that. We're working very closely with the owners on that, so that number one, we don't add needless costs to the project, and we don't raise expectations and have like a half-open highway while we sit around and wait for something to be delivered. So, I must say, both the department and the Turnpike Commission engineers are very, very professional and very, very attuned to the needs of the motoring public.
And hopefully we'll see those orange cones, and we'll be happy to see them, making the road safer. And I want to thank you on that safety issue for taking, your organization for taking the lead on workplace safety, because not only does it protect the workers, but usually the people get hurt are really the drivers. And so now, with the way that legislation passed, are you still happy with that?
Well, we're very happy with that. I mean, now we are actually looking at, believe it or not, in a couple of years that sunset provision comes up. So that to your other question, that's another thing we're working with the General Assembly and the owner agencies on making some tweaks, improving that a little bit, and making sure that it's ready for reauthorization going forward and expanding. We've seen a lot of violations, but hopefully those will start to come down. So if the cameras are working and accidents in work zones have come down a little bit, so we're pleased with that.
And the cameras are going to continue?
We think so.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, and like I said, there are some changes that need to be made to the legislation. We think primarily is that that first warning system. We maybe need to go to, you get your get your fine right away, but. And then some technical tweaks to the how the equipment works and that sort of thing. So. But generally, we've had good acceptance. We're not getting any pushback from the motoring public. We're not getting pushback from the General Assembly. It seems to be working well, and people like it.
So I think as we close out this segment today, we should ask all of our viewers to be very patient next spring when all of the, as you said, the orange cones are out. It's a good thing. It's jobs in Pennsylvania. I'm sure we'll see a great increase in people being hired, which is good in general. So it's just a question of being patient.
Well, yes, exactly. We think that the speed limits are matched to what people can do going through the roads, and if you slow down to those speed limits, you'll get through the work zones better.
And you won't get a ticket, right?
Well, you won't get a ticket, and hopefully, and more importantly, you won't get in an accident.
Yeah.
And the safety of people driving through the work zones is every bit as important as the safety of the workers there.
Well, we want to thank you very much for being here today. Wish you the happiest of holidays. Jerry and I are very pleased to have you here, and we look forward to having you back.
Yeah, best to you too.
Thank you very much.
Stay tuned for another segment of Behind the Headlines.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors, the largest, most influential municipal association in the Commonwealth. Since 1921, PSATS has been preserving and strengthening township government and securing greater visibility and involvement for townships in the state and federal political arenas. Covering 95% of Pennsylvania's land mass, townships represent 5.5 million residents, more than any other type of political subdivision in Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org.
Hi, welcome back. On this segment, Jerry and I are joined by a new person to us. We're
Welcome.
very excited to have Rebecca Oyler with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, Rebecca is the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Motor Truck Association. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the PA Motor Truck Association?
Sure. The Pennsylvania Motor Truck Association is an association of companies, small and large, all the way from large trucking companies down to single drivers, as well as all of the suppliers, safety professionals, and insurance companies. Everybody who's interested in advocating and bringing about positive change for the trucking industry. So we actually provide safety training and other training for our members and for the general public at times. But we also advocate on behalf of the industry because we find that sometimes policymakers don't know all about the industry and all about the implications of some of the policies they're discussing. So we like to educate folks about the industry, about the trucking industry, and help them understand the impact of policies that they're discussing. So that's pretty much what PMTA does, and I'm happy to be here to talk about it.
Well, I
thank
think
you for
we'll
being here.
get into the nitty-gritty
Yeah.
of those policy decisions as we
Yeah,
as we talk with you today.
Yeah,
Sure.
Thanks for being here. And also the viewers are really interested in it because of the fact that they're out there with their loved ones, interacting with your members.
Yes.
And there are so many issues now that, hopefully in this segment we'll be able to touch on a few of them. But, from the fact of how many drivers are there, what do they think about the laws in the different states, the supply chain problems, and so
Yeah.
it's really timely that you're here. So thanks, and maybe you could explain better to me and also to our viewers. What's up with the supply chain and all this talk about not having enough drivers? Do we have enough drivers in Pennsylvania, and what's up?
Oh, there's a lot of things we can go into about the supply chain, and of course everybody knows it's an issue because we go to the stores and there are spaces on the shelves. There are things missing. You go to a restaurant and then you can't order things from the menu because we know. I know personally, you go to the store and to get a product as you always get, and they'll tell you, it's on a truck somewhere. We haven't got our truck delivery. So trucking is a huge issue that's part of the supply chain, but the supply chain issues itself, supply chain is a really complicated, multifaceted international problem. So I don't want to make it sound like it's just trucking that's an issue, although I'll be happy to talk about the trucking issues. But it really does, have to do with a lot of points along the process. I know people have seen the large shipping containers out in the middle of the Pacific. That is an issue, shipping internationally in the ports. The backlog of shipping containers at ports are an issue. There's also a shortage of containers that those goods are shipped in, as well as the chassis that the containers are shipped on, that trucks pull them on. So there's a shortage not only of materials, but also workers. So workers in the ports, workers in the manufacturing plants that are producing materials, workers in the warehouses. There are also, lack of space in warehouses right now. So there's a lot of issues, and they all sort of interplay with each other. But to your point about trucking, there is a truck driver shortage, and there has been for a long time. But of course, the pandemic really exacerbated things because last year the average age of a truck driver is around 50 years old. So last year we had a lot of our older truck drivers retire a little early. They were concerned about their health, understandably, and with the pandemic we had a lot of early retirements. At the same time, we didn't have young people coming into the industry last year as much because CDL programs were shut down or limited in their capacities. The driver's licensing centers were closed in some places or limited hours. So we weren't even bringing in new people to replace some of those retirees. So the pandemic really exacerbated what was already a shortage. And so this year we're looking at about an 80,000 driver shortage across the country of drivers. So that is exacerbating, you know, all of the other issues in the supply chain. The truck driver shortage is absolutely contributing to that.
So what is your industry doing to incentivize more people into truck driving?
Sure. There are a lot of things that we're trying to do. In the short term, the infrastructure bill that just passed in Washington actually has a provision in it that provides a pilot program for 18 to 20-year-old drivers. So it's interesting that if a CDL driver can drive, for example, from Philadelphia to Erie in Pennsylvania, but he can't drive across the bridge to New Jersey. Under 21 CDL drivers are not permitted to participate in interstate commerce. So it's a really...
Did you know that?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep. So there's a pilot program, and I know the trucking industry for years has been advocating to fix that issue. There's a pilot program in the infrastructure bill that would allow 3,000 under 21 drivers to participate in an apprenticeship program that would allow them to drive interstate. So that's one thing. We're trying to get more younger people into the industry because what's happening is those 18-year-olds, a lot of them may graduate from high school and think, you know, trucking's a pretty cool career. I think I want to do something in it, but they can't find a job. They may even get their CDL, but they can't find a job in the industry until they can drive out of state. So they end up going into other careers, you know, maybe construction, maybe one of the trades, and we lose them forever. We never get them back. So we really need to build that career pathway from, you know, 18 to 21. So we're hoping that this infrastructure bill and the pilot program will help facilitate that. Other than that, there's a lot of things that the industry is doing, increasing wages. You know, it's a tough job, trucking. There's a lot of things that make it a tough job, but there are a lot of things that we can do to improve it. And I know a lot of our companies have increased wages across the board, tried to make the job a little more appealing by breaking up routes, for example, so you can be home with your family in the evenings rather than, you know, going out on the road for long periods of time. So there are a lot of things the industry is doing as well to try and recruit more drivers and make the job more appealing. The other thing in that infrastructure bill is they actually set up a task force for women drivers. So women make up about 7% of the truck driving workforce right now, which is pretty low considering they're, you know, a little less than half of the total workforce. So we really need to find ways to incentivize and help women, you know, be familiar with the industry and find positions in it. So looking forward to that as well.
I know that there was, you know, one of the detriments was the fact that, well, you would take a load, say, from Pennsylvania and Indiana, but then you'd have to stay over, you know, and especially the independent truckers stay over because you don't have a load to come back, you know, and you can't afford, especially now with the high taxes, you know, on fuel, you know, that's caused by this administration, you know, needlessly, that's another problem. And so that's what I was wondering, in order to get our viewers and the policymakers all on the same page with the trucking industry, does the Pennsylvania Motor Truck Association, is that made up of mostly Pennsylvania truckers, or is that made up of national companies that do that? And then how do you then interact with the other 49, you know, since you're the Pennsylvania Motor Truck Association? I think all of us would like to know that.
Yeah, that's a great question. We do have many Pennsylvania companies as a part of our association, but we also have the national companies, many of the national companies too. So we do work together. I mean, the interests of the trucking world, the trucking industry, are really aligned, you know, across the board. We have most of the same interests. For example, you know, recent survey of a trucking industry found the #1 issue for the 5th year in a row was the driver shortage. So, and that's across the board. That's, you know, everywhere. So we know we have a lot of the same issues that we're working on. And we do have a national association, the American Trucking Associations also has its own membership, but each of the state associations is also a member of that organization. So that's how we sort of coordinate our efforts across the country. But we really do work on a lot of the same issues.
So let's talk a little bit about, I mean, you can't leave your house right now and drive anywhere without seeing a truck on the road. Let's talk about the impact that trucking has on the economy in Pennsylvania. I mean, just in terms of number of jobs, the wages, the taxes paid. I mean, it's pretty significant.
It sure is, and I really can't understate the impact of the trucking industry on the economy. I think that's the one thing that the pandemic brought for us is no one underestimates the value of truck drivers nowadays, of trucking companies.
That's a good thing.
If you got it, a truck brought it.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yep. And you know, everybody, myself included, look forward to those Amazon boxes on the doorstep. You know, that was a truck that brought that. And the shelves that were empty during the pandemic, tragically, you know, it was the trucks who resolved those issues. And it's now truckers who are bringing the vaccine and continuing to bring PPE and all the supplies that we need to deal with the pandemic. And that was all of last year. But so we know truckers are critical to, you know, dealing with the pandemic, but they also are critical to the economy generally. I mean, every manufactured piece of good that transports, in fact, 96% of Pennsylvania manufactured goods are transported by truck. And 70% of all goods across the country are transported by truck. So trucks are really critical. And you think about, you know, those deliveries coming to your house, but it's not just that. It's throughout all the supply chain. So every part of the manufacturing process, for example, there's a truck that delivers pieces to the manufacturer, which delivers that to the next step in the process. So transportation is really throughout the entire economy. Our whole economy depends on it in every facet of it. There are 37,000 trucking jobs in Pennsylvania alone. And trucks pay about 40% of the transportation taxes in Pennsylvania.
Wow.
So they drive about 9% of the miles, but they pay 40% of the transportation taxes. So that's sort of an indication of, you know, where the trucking industry stands as part of the Pennsylvania economy.
And I know in the last minute that we have, you know, everyone's going to want, you know, because we're so interested, we're going to have you back, obviously.
Yeah.
But
we've got some other
but
issues.
where can we get in touch with you, and where can our viewers especially, you know, get in touch with you and all the businesses that are worried about this too?
Absolutely.
Because of the on-time delivery was so important. It changed. It used to be years ago you had an inventory, so if things went down you had a little bit of fudge time, but now it's on-time assembly, on-time delivery. And so give us your website and contact information.
Yeah, it's www.pmta.org. That's Pennsylvania
Great.
Motor Truck Association, PMTA.
Thanks.
Well, we would really like to thank you for being here today. A wealth of information. We didn't even touch on bridge tolling, so we have to have you back. We've got some more things to talk about there.
Happy to talk about that, yeah.
Okay. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Behind the Headlines.